The Book of 1000 Nights and a Night, Volume 1, translated by Richard Burton. This is a LibriVox recording. All the LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to find out how to volunteer, please contact LibriVox.org. Recorded by Peter Yearsley. The Book of the 1000 Nights and a Night, Section 1. In the name of Allah, the Compassionating, the Compassionate. Praise be to Allah, the Beneficent King, the Creator of the Universe, Lord of the three worlds, who set up the firmament without pillars in its stead, and who stretched out the earth even as a bed. And grace and prayer blessings be upon our Lord Mohammed, Lord of apostolic men, and upon his family and companion train. Prayer and blessings enduring, and grace which unto the day of doom shall remain. Amen. O thou of the three worlds sovereign. And afterwards. Verily the works and words of those gone before us have become instances and examples to men of our modern day, that folk may view what admonishing chances befell other folk, and may therefrom take warning, and that they may peruse the annals of antique peoples and all that hath betided them, and be thereby ruled and restrained. Praise therefore be to him who hath made the histories of the past an admonition unto the present. Now of such instances are the tales called 1000 Nights and a Night, together with their far-famed legends and wonders. Therein it is related, but Allah is all-knowing of his hidden things, and all-ruling and all-honoured, and all-giving and all-gracious and all-merciful, that in tide of yore and in time long gone before there was a king of the kings of the Banu Sasan in the islands of India and China, a lord of armies and guards and servants and dependents. He left only two sons, one in the prime of manhood, and the other yet a youth, while both were knights and braves, albeit the elder was a doughtier horseman than the younger. So he succeeded to the empire, when he ruled the land and lorded it over his lieges with justice so exemplary that he was beloved by all the peoples of his capital and of his kingdom. His name was King Shahryar, and he made his younger brother Shah Zaman hight King of Samarcand in barbarian land. These two ceased not to abide in their several realms, and the law was ever carried out in their dominions, and each ruled his own kingdom with equity and fair dealing to his subjects, in extreme solace and enjoyment. And this condition continually endured for a score of years. But at the end of the 20th twelvemonth the elder king yearned for a sight of his younger brother, and felt that he must look upon him once more. So he took counsel with his Wazir about visiting him, but the minister, finding the project unadvisable, recommended that a letter be written and a present be sent under his charge to the younger brother, with an invitation to visit the elder. Having accepted this advice, the king forthwith bade prepare handsome gifts, such as horses with saddles of gem-encrusted gold, Mamelukes or white slaves, beautiful handmaids, high-breasted virgins, and splendid stuffs and costly. He then wrote a letter to Shah Zaman, expressing his warm love and great wish to see him, ending with these words: "We therefore hope of the favour and affection of the beloved brother that he will condescend to bestir himself and turn his face uswards. Furthermore, we have sent our Wazir to make all ordinance for the march, and our one and only desire is to see thee ere we die. But if thou delay or disappoint us, we shall not survive the blow. Wherewith peace be upon thee." Then King Shahryar, having sealed the missive and given it to the Wazir with the offerings aforementioned, commanded him to shorten his skirts and strain his strength, and make all expedition in going and returning. "Hearkening and obedience," quoth the minister, who fell to making ready without stay, and packed up his loads and prepared all his requisites without delay. This occupied him 3 days, and on the dawn of the 4th he took leave of his king and marched right away, over desert and hill way, stony waste and pleasant lea, without halting by day or by night. But whenever he entered a realm whose ruler was subject to his suzerain, where he was greeted with magnificent gifts of gold and silver, and all manner of presents fair and rare, he would tarry there 3 days, the term of the guest rite, and when he left on the 4th he would be honourably escorted for a whole day's march. As soon as the Wazir drew near Shah Zaman's court in Samarcand, he dispatched to report his arrival one of his high officials, who presented himself before the king, and kissing ground between his hands, delivered his message. Hereupon the king commanded sundry of his grandees and lords of his realm to fare forth and meet his brother's Wazir at the distance of a full day's journey, which they did, greeting him respectfully and wishing him all prosperity, and forming an escort and a procession. When he entered the city he proceeded straightway to the palace, where he presented himself in the royal presence, and after kissing ground and praying for the king's health and happiness, and for victory over all his enemies, he informed him that his brother was yearning to see him, and prayed for the pleasure of a visit. He then delivered the letter, which Shah Zaman took from his hand and read. It contained sundry hints and allusions which required thought, but when the king had fully comprehended its import, he said, "I hear and I obey the commands of the beloved brother," adding to the Wazir, "But we will not march till after the 3rd day's hospitality." He appointed for the minister fitting quarters of the palace, and pitching tents for the troops, rationed them with whatever they might require of meat and drink and other necessaries. On the 4th day he made ready for wayfare, and got together sumptuous presents befitting his elder brother's majesty, and stablishing his chief Wazir viceroy of the lands during his absence. Then he caused his tents and camels and mules to be brought forth and encamped, with their bales and loads, attendants and guards, within sight of the city, in readiness to set out next morning for his brother's capital. But when the night was half spent, he bethought him that he had forgotten in his palace somewhat which he should have brought with him, and so he returned privily and entered his apartments, where he found the Queen, his wife, asleep on his own carpet bed, embracing with both arms a black cook of loathsome aspect, and foul with kitchen grease and grime. When he saw this, the world waxed black before his sight, and he said, "If such case happen while I am yet within sight of the city, what will be the doings of this damned whore during my long absence at my brother's court?" So he drew his scimitar and, cutting the two in 4 pieces with a single blow, left them on the carpet, and returned presently to his camp, without letting anyone know of what had happened. Then he gave orders for immediate departure, and set out at once and began his travel. But he could not help thinking over his wife's treason, and he kept ever saying to himself, "How could she do this deed by me? How could she work her own death?" Till excessive grief seized him, his colour changed to yellow, his body waxed weak, and he was threatened with a dangerous malady, such an one as bringeth men to die. So the Wazir shortened his stages and tarried long at the watering stations, and did his best to solace the king. Now when Shah Zaman drew near the capital of his brother, he dispatched vaunt couriers and messengers of glad tidings to announce his arrival, and Shahryar came forth to meet him with his Wazirs and Emirs and lords and grandees of his realm, and saluted him and joyed with exceeding joy, and caused the city to be decorated in his honour. When, however, the brothers met, the elder could not but see the change of complexion in the younger, and questioned him of his case, whereto he replied, "'Tis caused by the travails of wayfare, and my case needs care, for I have suffered from the change of water and air. But Allah be praised for reuniting me with a brother so dear and so rare." On this wise he dissembled and kept his secret, adding, "O King of the time and Caliph of the tide, only toil and moil have tinged my face yellow with bile, and hath made my eyes sink deep in my head." Then the two entered the capital in all honour, and the elder brother lodged the younger in a palace overhanging the pleasure garden, and after a time, seeing his condition still unchanged, he attributed it to his separation from his country and kingdom. So he let him wend his own ways and asked no questions of him, till one day when he again said, "O my brother, I see thou art grown weaker of body and yellower of colour." "O my brother," replied Shah Zaman, "I have an internal wound." Still he would not tell him what he had witnessed in his wife. Thereupon Shahryar summoned doctors and surgeons and bade them treat his brother according to the rules of art, which they did for a whole month, but their sherbets and potions naught availed, for he would dwell upon the deed of his wife, and despondency, instead of diminishing, prevailed, and leechcraft treatment utterly failed. One day his elder brother said to him, "I am going forth to hunt and course, and to take my pleasure and pastime. Maybe this would lighten thy heart." Shah Zaman, however, refused, saying, "O my brother, my soul yearneth for naught of this sort, and I entreat thy favour to suffer me to tarry quietly in this place, being wholly taken up with my malady." So King Shah Zaman passed his night in the palace, and next morning, when his brother had fared forth, he removed from his room and sat him down at one of the lattice windows overlooking the pleasure grounds, and there he abode thinking with saddest thoughts over his wife's betrayal, and burning sighs issued from his tortured breast. And as he continued in this case, lo! a postern of the palace, which was carefully kept private, swung open, and out of it came 20 slave girls, surrounding his brother's wife, who was wondrous fair, a model of beauty and comeliness and symmetry and perfect loveliness, and who paced with the grace of a gazelle which panteth for the cooling stream. Thereupon Shah Zaman drew back from the window, but he kept the bevy in sight, espying them from a place whence he could not be espied. They walked under the very lattice, and advanced a little way into the garden, till they came to a jetting fountain, amiddlemost a great basin of water. Then they stripped off their clothes, and behold, 10 of them were women concubines of the king, and the other 10 were white slaves. Then they all paired off, each with each, but the queen, who was left alone, presently cried out in a loud voice, "Here to me, O my lord Saeed!" and then sprang with a drop leap from one of the trees, a big slobbering blackamoor with rolling eyes which showed the whites, a truly hideous sight. He walked boldly up to her and threw his arms round her neck, while she embraced him as warmly. Then he bussed her, and winding his legs round hers, as a button loop clasps a button, he threw her and enjoyed her. On likewise did the other slaves with the girls, till all had satisfied their passions, and they ceased not from kissing and clipping, coupling and carousing, till day began to wane, when the Mamelukes rose from the damsels' bosoms, and the blackamoor slave dismounted from the queen's breast. The men resumed their disguises, and all except the negro who swarmed up the tree entered the palace, and closed the postern door as before. Now when Shah Zaman saw this conduct of his sister-in-law, he said in himself, "By Allah, my calamity is lighter than this. My brother is a greater king among the kings than I am, yet this infamy goeth on in his very palace, and his wife is in love with that filthiest of filthy slaves. But this only showeth that they all do it, and that there is no woman but who cuckoldeth her husband. Then the curse of Allah upon one and all, and upon the fools who lean against them for support, or who place the reins of conduct in their hands." So he put away his melancholy and despondency, regret and repine, and allayed his sorrow by constantly repeating those words, adding, "'Tis my conviction that no man in this world is safe from their malice." When supper time came they brought him the trays, and he ate with voracious appetite, for he had long refrained from meat, feeling unable to touch any dish, however dainty. Then he returned grateful thanks to Almighty Allah, praising him and blessing him, and he spent a most restful night, it having been long since he had savoured the sweet food of sleep. Next day he broke his fast heartily, and began to recover health and strength, and presently regained excellent condition. His brother came back from the chase 10 days after, when he rode out to meet him, and they saluted each other. And when King Shahryar looked at King Shah Zaman, he saw how the hue of health had returned to him, how his face had waxed ruddy, and how he ate with an appetite after his late scanty diet. He wondered much and said, "O my brother, I was so anxious that thou wouldst join me in hunting and chasing, and wouldst take thy pleasure and pastime in my dominion." He thanked him and excused himself. Then the two took horse and rode into the city, and when they were seated at their ease in the palace, the food trays were set before them, and they ate their sufficiency. After the meats were removed, and they had washed their hands, King Shahryar turned to his brother and said, "My mind is overcome with wonderment at thy condition. I was desirous to carry thee with me to the chase, but I saw thee changed in hue, pale and wan to view, and in sore trouble of mind too. But now, Alhamdolillah, glory be to God, I see thy natural colour hath returned to thy face, and that thou art again in the best of case. It was my belief that thy sickness came of severance from thy family and friends, and absence from capital and country, so I refrained from troubling thee with further questions. But now I beseech thee to expound to me the cause of thy complaint and thy change of colour, and to explain the reason of thy recovery and the return to the ruddy hue of health which I am wont to view. So speak out and hide naught." When Shah Zaman heard this, he bowed groundwards awhile his head, then raised it and said, "I will tell thee what caused my complaint and my loss of colour, but excuse my acquainting thee with the cause of its return to me and the reason of my complete recovery. Indeed, I pray thee not to press me for a reply." Said Shahryar, who was much surprised by these words, "Let me hear first what produced thy pallor and thy poor condition." "Know then, O my brother," rejoined Shah Zaman, "that when thou sentest thy Wazir with the invitation to place myself between thy hands, I made ready and marched out of my city. But presently I minded me having left behind me in the palace a string of jewels intended as a gift to thee. I returned for it alone, and found my wife on my carpet bed and in the arms of a hideous black cook. So I slew the twain and came to thee. Yet my thoughts brooded over this business, and I lost my bloom and became weak. But excuse me if I still refuse to tell thee what was the reason of my complexion returning." Shahryar shook his head, marvelling with extreme marvel, and with the fire of wrath flaming up from his heart he cried, "Indeed, the malice of woman is mighty!" Then he took refuge from them with Allah and said, "In very sooth, O my brother, thou hast escaped many an evil by putting thy wife to death, and right excusable were thy wrath and grief for such mishap which never yet befell crowned king like thee. By Allah, had the case been mine, I would not have been satisfied without slaying 1,000 women, and that way madness lies. But now praise be to Allah who hath tempered to thee thy tribulation, and needs must thou acquaint me with that which so suddenly restored to thee complexion and health, and explain to me what causeth this concealment." "O King of the age, again I pray thee excuse my so doing." "Nay, but thou must." "I fear, my brother, lest the recital cause thee more anger and sorrow than afflicted me." "That were but a better reason," quoth Shahryar, "for telling me the whole history, and I conjure thee by Allah not to keep back aught from me." Thereupon Shah Zaman told him all he had seen, from commencement to conclusion, ending with these words, "When I beheld thy calamity and the treason of thy wife, O my brother, and I respected that thou art in years my senior and in sovereignty my superior, mine own sorrow was belittled by the comparison, and my mind recovered tone and temper. So, throwing off melancholy and despondency, I was able to eat and drink and sleep, and thus I speedily regained health and strength. Such is the truth and the whole truth." When King Shahryar heard this he waxed wroth with exceeding wrath, and rage was like to strangle him; but presently he recovered himself and said, "O my brother, I would not give thee the lie in this matter, but I cannot credit it till I see it with mine own eyes." "An thou wouldst look upon thy calamity," quoth Shah Zaman, "rise at once and make ready again for hunting and coursing, and then hide thyself with me. So shalt thou witness it and thine eyes shall verify it." "True," quoth the King, whereupon he let make proclamation of his intent to travel, and the troops and tents fared forth without the city, camping within sight, and Shahryar sallied out with them and took seat amidmost his host, bidding the slaves admit no man to him. When night came on he summoned his Wazir and said to him, "Sit thou in my stead and let none wot of my absence till the term of 3 days." Then the brothers disguised themselves and returned by night with all secrecy to the palace, where they passed the dark hours; and at dawn they seated themselves at the lattice overlooking the pleasure grounds, when presently the Queen and her handmaids came out as before, and passing under the windows made for the fountain. Here they stripped, 10 of them being men to 10 women, and the King's wife cried out, "Where art thou, O Saeed?" The hideous blackamoor dropped from the tree straightway, and rushing into her arms without stay or delay, cried out, "I am Sa'ad al Din Saud." The lady laughed heartily, and all fell to satisfying their lusts, and remained so occupied for a couple of hours, when the white slaves rose up from the handmaidens' breasts, and the blackamoor dismounted from the queen's bosom. Then they went into the basin, and after performing the ghusl, or complete ablution, donned their dresses and retired, as they had done before. When King Shahryar saw this infamy of his wife and concubines, he became as one distraught, and he cried out, "Only in utter solitude can man be safe from the doings of this vile world. By Allah, life is naught but one great wrong." Presently he added, "Do not thwart me, O my brother, in what I propose." And the other answered, "I will not." So he said, "Let us up as we are, and depart forthright hence, for we have no concern with kingship, and let us overwander Allah's earth, worshipping the Almighty, till we find someone to whom the like calamity hath happened; and if we find none, then will death be more welcome to us than life." So the two brothers issued from a second private postern of the palace, and they never stinted wayfaring by day and by night, until they reached a tree amiddle of a meadow, hard by a spring of sweet water on the shore of the salt sea. Both drank of it, and sat down to take their rest. And when an hour of the day had gone by, lo! they heard a mighty roar and uproar in the middle of the main, as though the heavens were falling upon the earth, and the sea brake with waves before them, and from it towered a black pillar, which grew and grew till it rose skywards, and began making for that meadow. Seeing it, they waxed fearful exceedingly, and climbed to the top of the tree, which was lofty, whence they gazed to see what might be the matter. And behold, it was a Jinni, huge of height and burly of breast and bulk, broad of brow and black of blee, bearing on his head a coffer of crystal. He strode to land, wading through the deep, and coming to the tree whereupon were the two kings, seated himself beneath it. He then set down the coffer on its bottom, and from out of it drew a casket with 7 padlocks of steel, which he unlocked with 7 keys of steel he took from beneath his thigh. And out of it a young lady was seen to come, white-skinned and of winsomest mien, of stature fine and thin, and bright as though a moon of the 14th night she had been, or of the sun raining lively sheen. Even so the poet Utayya hath excellently said, "She rose like the morn as she shone through the night, and she gilded the grove with her gracious sight. From her radiance the sun taketh increase, when she unveileth and shameth the moonshine bright. Bow down all beings between her hands, as she showeth charms with her veil undight, and she floodeth cities with torrent tears, when she flasheth her look of levee light." The Jinni seated her under the tree by his side, and looking at her said, "O choicest love of this heart of mine, O dame of noblest line, whom I snatched away on thy bride night, that none may prevent me taking thy maidenhead, or tumble thee before I did, and whom none save myself hath loved or hath enjoyed. O my sweetheart, I would fief sleep a little while." He then laid his head upon the lady's thighs, and stretching out his legs, which extended down to the sea, slept and snored and sparked like the roll of thunder. Presently she raised her head toward the tree top, and saw the two kings perched near the summit. Then she softly lifted off her lap the Jinni's pate, which she was tired of supporting, and placed it upon the ground. Then standing upright under the tree, signed to the kings, "Come ye down, ye two, and fear naught from this Ifrit." They were in a terrible fright when they found that she had seen them, and answered her in the same manner, "Allah upon thee, and by thy modesty, O lady, excuse us from coming down." But she rejoined by saying, "Allah upon you both, that ye come down forthright, and if ye come not, I will rouse upon you my husband, this Ifrit, and he shall do you to die by the illest of deaths." And she continued making signals to them. So being afraid they came down to her, and she rose before them and said, "Stroke me a strong stroke, without stay or delay, otherwise will I arouse and set upon you this Ifrit, who shall slay you straightway." Then they said to her, "O our lady, we conjure thee by Allah let us off this work, for we are fugitives from such, and in extreme dread and terror of this thy husband. How then can we do it in such a way as thou desires?" "Leave this talk, it needs must be so," quoth she, and she swore them by him who raised the skies on high, without prop or pillar, that if they worked not to her will, she would cause them to be slain and cast into the sea. Whereupon, out of fear, King Shahryar said to King Shah Zaman, "O my brother, do thou what she biddeth thee do." But he replied, "I will not do it till thou do it before I do." And they began disputing about futtering her. Then quoth she to the twain, "How is it I see you disputing and demurring? If ye do not come forward like men and do the deed of kind, ye two, I will arouse upon you the Ifrit." At this, by reason of their sore dread of the Jinni, both did by her what she bade them do, and when they had dismounted from her, she said, "Well done." She then took from her pocket a purse and drew out a knotted string, whereon were strung 570 seal rings, and asked, "Know ye what be these?" They answered her, saying, "We know not." Then quoth she, "These be the signets of 570 men who have all futtered me upon the horns of this foul, this foolish, this filthy Ifrit. So give me also your 2 seal rings, ye pair of brothers." When they had drawn their 2 rings from their hands and given them to her, she said to them, "Of a truth this Ifrit bore me off on my bride night, and put me into a casket and set the casket in a coffer, and to the coffer he affixed 7 strong padlocks of steel, and deposited me on the deep bottom of the sea that raves, dashing and clashing with waves, and guarded me so that I might remain chaste and honest," quotha. "None save himself might have connection with me. But I have lain under as many of my kind as I please, and this wretched Jinni wotteth not that destiny may not be averted nor hindered by aught, and that whatso woman willeth, the same she fulfilleth, however man nilleth. Even so saith one of them, Rely not on women, trust not to their hearts, whose joys and whose sorrows are hung to their parts. Lying love they will swear thee, whence guile ne'er departs. Take Yusuf for sample, wear slates and wear smarts. Iblis ousted Adam, see ye not through their arts." And another saith, "Stint thy blame, man, 'twill drive thee to a passion without bounds. My fault is not so heavy as fault in it hast found. If true lover I become, then to me there cometh not save what happened unto many in the bygone stound. For wonderful is he, and right worthy of our praise, who from wiles of female wits kept him safe and kept him sound." Hearing these words they marvelled with exceeding marvel, and she went from them to the Ifrit and, taking up his head on her thigh as before, said to them softly, "Now wend your ways and bear yourselves beyond the bounds of his malice." So they fared forth saying either to other, "Allah! Allah!" and "There be no Majesty and there be no Might save in Allah the Glorious, the Great, and with Him we seek refuge from women's malice and sleight, for of a truth it hath no mate in might. Consider, O my brother, the ways of this marvellous lady, with an Ifrit who is so much more powerful than we are. Now since there hath happened to him a greater mishap than that which befell us, and which should bear us abundant consolation, so return we to our countries and capitals, and let us decide never to intermarry with womankind, and presently we will show them what will be our action." Thereupon they rode back to the tents of King Shahryar, which they reached on the morning of the 3rd day; and having mustered the Wazirs and Emirs, the Chamberlains and high officials, he gave a robe of honour to his Viceroy and issued orders for an immediate return to the city. There he sat him upon his throne and, sending for the Chief Minister, the father of the 2 damsels who, Inshallah, will presently be mentioned, he said, "I command thee to take my wife and smite her to death, for she hath broken her plight and her faith." So he carried her to the place of execution and did her die. Then King Shahryar took brand in hand and, repairing to the Seraglio, slew all the concubines and their Mamelukes. He also sware himself by a binding oath that whatever wife he married he would abate her maidenhead at night and slay her next morning to make sure of his honour. "For," said he, "there never was nor is there one chaste woman upon face of earth." Then Shah Zaman prayed for permission to fare homewards, and he went forth equipped and escorted, and travelled till he reached his own country. Meanwhile Shahryar commanded his Wazir to bring him the bride of the night, that he might go in to her. So he produced a most beautiful girl, the daughter of one of the Emirs, and the King went in unto her at eventide, and when morning dawned he bade his minister strike off her head, and the Wazir did accordingly, for fear of the Sultan. On this wise he continued for the space of 3 years, marrying a maiden every night, and killing her the next morning, till folk raised an outcry against him, and cursed him, praying Allah utterly to destroy him and his rule. And women made an uproar, and mothers wept, and parents fled with their daughters, till there remained not in the city a young person fit for carnal copulation. Presently the king ordered his chief Wazir, the same who was charged with the executions, to bring him a virgin, as was his wont. And the minister went forth and searched, and found none. So he returned home in sorrow and anxiety, fearing for his life from the king. Now he had 2 daughters, Shahrazad and Dunyazad hight, of whom the elder had perused the books, annals, and legends of preceding kings, and the stories, examples, and instances of bygone men and things. Indeed, it was said that she had collected 1,000 books of histories relating to antique races and departed rulers. She had perused the works of the poets and knew them by heart. She had studied philosophy and the sciences, arts, and accomplishments, and she was pleasant and polite, wise and witty, well read and well bred. Now on that day she said to her father, "Why do I see thee thus changed, and laden with cark and care?" "Concerning this matter," quoth one of the poets, "tell whoso hath sorrow, grief never shall last; even as joy hath no morrow, so woe shall go past." When the Wazir heard from his daughter these words, he related to her from first to last all that had happened between him and the king. Thereupon said she, "By Allah, O my father, how long shall this slaughter of women endure? Shall I tell thee what is in my mind in order to save both sides from destruction?" "Say on, O my daughter," quoth he, and quoth she, "I wish thou wouldst give me in marriage to this King Shahryar. Either I shall live or I shall be a ransom for the virgin daughters of Moslems and the cause of their deliverance from his hands and thine." "Allah upon thee," cried he in wrath exceeding that lacked no feeding, "O scanty of wit, expose not thy life to such peril! How darest thou address me in words so wide from wisdom and unfar from foolishness? Know that one who lacketh experience in worldly matters readily falleth into misfortune, and whoso considereth not the end keepeth not the world to friend. And the vulgar say, I was lying at mine ease, naught but my officiousness brought me unease." "Needs must thou," she broke in, "make me a doer of this good deed, and let him kill me an he will. I shall only die a ransom for others." "O my daughter," asked he, "and how shall that profit thee when thou shalt have thrown away thy life?" And she answered, "O my father, it must be, come of it what will." The Wazir was again moved to fury and blamed and reproached her, ending with, "In very deed I fear lest the same befal thee which befell the bull and the ass with the husbandman." "And what," asked she, "befell them, my father?" Whereupon the Wazir began the tale of the bull and the ass. The end of Section 1 in Volume 1 of the Book of the 1,000 Nights and a Night, translated by Richard Burton.
Section 2 of 1,000 Nights and a Night. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Gesine. The Book of 1,000 Nights and a Night, Volume 1, translated by Richard Burton. Section 2. Tale of the Bull and the Ass. Know, O my daughter, that there was once a merchant who owned much money and many men, and who was rich in cattle and camels. He had also a wife and family, and he dwelt in the country, being experienced in husbandry and devoted to agriculture. Now Allah Most High had endowed him with understanding the tongues of beasts and birds of every kind, but under pain of death if he divulged the gift to any. So he kept it secret for very fear. He had in his cowhouse a bull and an ass, each tethered to his own stall, one hard by the other. As the merchant was sitting near hand one day, with his servants and his children playing about him, he heard the bull say to the ass, "Hail and health to thee, O father of walking! For that thou enjoyest rest and good ministering, all under thee is clean swept and fresh sprinkled, men wait upon thee and feed thee, and thy provaunt is sifted barley and thy drink pure spring water, while I, unhappy creature, am led forth in the middle of the night, when they set on my neck the plough and a something called yoke, and I tire at cleaving the earth from dawn of day till set of sun. I am forced to do more than I can, and to bear all manner of ill treatment from night to night, after which they take me back with my sides torn, my neck flayed, my legs aching and mine eyelids sored with tears. Then they shut me up in the byre and throw me beans and crushed straw, mixed with dirt and chaff, and I lie in dung and filth and foul stinks through the livelong night. But thou art ever in a place sweet and sprinkled and cleansed, and thou art always lying at ease, save when it happens, and seldom enough, that the master hath some business, when he mounts thee and rides thee to town and returns with thee forthright. So it happens that I am toiling and distress, while thou takest thine ease and thy rest, thou sleepest while I am sleepless, I hunger still while thou eatest thy fill, and I win contempt while thou winnest good will." When the bull ceased speaking, the ass turned towards him and said, "O broad o' brow! O thou lost one! He lied not when he dubbed thee bull head, for thou, O father of a bull, hast neither forethought nor contrivance. Thou art the simplest of simpletons, and thou knowest naught of good advisers. Hast thou not heard the saying of the wise? For others these hardships and labours I bear, and theirs is the pleasure and mine is the care, as the bleacher who blacketh his brow in the sun, to whiten the raiment which other men wear. But thou, O fool, art full of zeal and thou toilest and moilest before the master, and thou tearest and wearest and slayest thyself for the comfort of another. Hast thou never heard the saw that saith, 'None to guide and from the way go wide'? Thou wendest forth at the call to dawn prayer, and thou returnest not until sundown, and through the livelong day thou endurest all manner hardships, to wit, beating and belabouring and bad language. Now hearken to me, Sir Bull. When they tie thee to thy stinking manger, thou pawest the ground with thy forehand, and rushest out with thy hind hoofs, and pushest with thy horns and bellowest aloud, so they deem thee contented. And when they throw thee thy fodder, thou fallest on it with greed, and hastenest to line thine fair fat paunch. But if thou accept my advice, it will be better for thee, and thou wilt lead an easier life even than mine. When thou goest afield, and they lay the thing called yoke on thy neck, lie down, and rise not again, though haply they swinge thee. And if thou rise, lie down a second time, and when they bring thee home and offer thee thy beans, fall backwards, and only sniff at thy meat, and withdraw thee and taste it not, and be satisfied with thy crushed straw and chaff, and on this wise feign thou art sick, and cease not doing thus for a day or 2 days, or even 3 days, so shalt thou have rest from toil and moil." When the bull heard these words, he knew the ass to be his friend, and thanked him, saying, "Right is thy rede." And they prayed that all blessings might requite him, and cried, "O Father Wakener, thou hast made up for my failings." Now the merchant, O my daughter, understood all that passed between them. Next day the driver took the bull, and settling the plough on his neck, made him work as wont. But the bull began to shirk his ploughing, according to the advice of the ass, and the ploughman drubbed him till he broke the yoke and made off. But the man caught him up and leathered him till he despaired of his life. Not the less, however, would he do nothing but stand still and drop down till the evening. Then the herd led him home and stabled him in his stall, But he drew back from his manger, and neither stamped nor rammed nor butted nor bellowed, as he was wont to do, whereat the man wondered. He brought him the beans and husks, but he sniffed at them and left them, and lay down as far from them as he could, and passed the whole night fasting. The peasant came next morning, and, seeing the manger full of beans, the crushed straw untasted, and the ox lying on his back in sorriest plight, with legs outstretched and swollen belly, he was concerned for him and said to himself, "By Allah, he hath assuredly sickened, and this is the cause why he would not plough yesterday." Then he went to the merchant and reported, "O my master, the bull is ailing. He refused his fodder last night. Nay more, he hath not tasted a scrap of it this morning." Now the merchant farmer understood what all this meant, because he had overheard the talk between the bull and the ass; so quoth he, "Take that rascal donkey and set the yoke on his neck, and bind him to the plough and make him do bull's work." Thereupon the ploughman took the ass and worked him through the livelong day at the bull's task, and when he failed for weakness, he made him eat stick till his ribs were sore and his sides were sunken and his neck was hayed by the yoke; and when he came home in the evening he could hardly drag his limbs along, either forehand or hind legs. But as for the bull, he had passed the day lying at full length, and had eaten his fodder with an excellent appetite, and he ceased not calling down blessings on the ass for his good advice, unknowing what had come to him on his account. So when night set in and the ass returned to the byte, the bull rose up before him in honour and said, "May good tidings gladden thy heart, O father wakener! Through thee I have rested all this day and I have eaten my meat in peace and quiet." But the ass did not reply for wrath and heartburning and fatigue and the beating he had gotten; and he repented with the most grievous of repentance, and quoth he to himself, "This cometh of my folly in giving good counsel. As the saw saith, I was in joy and gladness, naught save my officiousness brought me this sadness. But I will bear in mind my innate worth and the nobility of my nature, for what saith the poet? Shall the beautiful hue of the basil fail, though the beetle's foot o'er the basil crawl? And though spider and fly be its denizens, shall disgrace attach to the royal hall? The cowrie, I ken, shall have the currency, but the pearl's clear drop, shall its value fall? And now I must take thought and put a trick upon him and return him to his place, else I die." Then he went aweary to his manger, while the bull thanked him and blessed him. "And even so, O my daughter," said the Wazir, "thou wilt die for lack of wits. Therefore sit thee still and say naught and expose not thy life to such stress; for, by Allah, I offer thee the best advice, which cometh of my affection and kindly solicitude for thee." "O my father," she answered, "needs must I go up to the King and be married to him." Quoth he, "Do not this deed;" and quoth she, "Of a truth I will;" whereat he rejoined, "If thou be not silent and bide still, I will do with thee even what the merchant did with his wife." "And what did he?" asked she. "Know then," answered the Wazir, "that after the return of the ass the merchant came out on the terrace roof with his wife and family, for it was a moonlit night and the moon at its full. Now the terrace overlooked the cow house and presently, as he sat there with his children playing about him, the trader heard the ass say to the bull, "Tell me, O father broad o' brow, what thou purposest to do tomorrow." The bull answered, "What but continue to follow thy counsel, O Aliboron? Indeed it was as good could be, and it hath given me rest and repose, nor will I now depart from it one little; so when they bring me my meat I will refuse it, and blow out my belly and counterfeit crank." The ass shook his head and said, "Beware of so doing, O father of a bull!" The bull asked, "Why?" and the ass answered, "Know that I am about to give thee the best of counsel; for verily I heard our owner say to the herd, if the bull rise not from his place to do his work this morning and if he retire from his fodder this day, make him over to the butcher that he may slaughter him and give his flesh to the poor and fashion a bit of leather from his hide." Now I fear for thee on account of this. So take my advice ere a calamity befall thee, and when they bring thee thy fodder eat it and rise up and bellow and paw the ground, or our master will assuredly slay thee, and peace be with thee. Thereupon the Bull arose and lowed aloud and thanked the Ass and said, Tomorrow I will readily go forth with them, and he at once ate up all his meat and even licked the manger. All this took place, and the owner was listening to their talk. Next morning the trader and his wife went to the Bull's crib and sat down, and the driver came and led forth the Bull, who, seeing his owner, whisked his tail in break wind, and frisked about so lustily that the merchant laughed a loud laugh and kept laughing till he fell on his back. His wife asked him, "Whereat laughest thou with such loud laughter as this?" And he answered her, "I laughed at a secret something which I have heard and seen, but cannot say lest I die my death." She returned, "Perforce thou must discover it to me and disclose the cause of thy laughing, even if thou come to thy death." But he rejoined, "I cannot reveal what beasts and birds say in their lingo, for fear I die." Then quoth she, "By Allah, thou liest! This is a mere pretext. Thou laughest at none save me, and now thou wouldest hide somewhat from me. But by the Lord of the Heavens, an thou disclose not the cause, I will no longer cohabit with thee, I will leave thee at once." And she sat down and cried. Whereupon quoth the merchant, "Woe betide thee! What means thy weeping? Bear Allah and leave these words and query me no more questions." "Needs must thou tell me the cause of that laugh," said she, and he replied, "Thou wottest that when I prayed Allah to vouchsafe me understanding of the tongues of beasts and birds, I made a vow never to disclose the secret to any under pain of dying on the spot." "No matter," cried she, "tell me what secret passed between the Bull and the Ass, and die this very hour, an thou be so minded." And she ceased not to importune him till he was worn out and clean distraught. So at last he said, "Summon thy father and thy mother and our kith and kin and sundry of our neighbours," which she did. And he sent for the Kazi and his assessors, intending to make his will and reveal to her his secret and die the death; for he loved her with love exceeding because she was his cousin, the daughter of his father's brother and the mother of his children, and he had lived with her a life of 120 years. Then, having assembled all the family and the folk of his neighbourhood, he said to them, "By me there hangeth a strange story, and 'tis such that if I discover the secret to any, I am a dead man." Therefore quoth every one of those present to the woman, "Allah upon thee, leave this sinful obstinacy and recognise the right of this matter, lest haply thy husband and the father of thy children die." But she rejoined, "I will not turn from it till he tell me, even though he may come by his death." So they ceased to urge her, and the trader rose from amongst them and repaired to an outhouse to perform Wuzu ablution; and he purposed thereafter to return and to tell them his secret and to die. Now, daughter Shahrazad, that merchant had in his outhouses some 50 hens under one cock, and whilst making ready to farewell his folk, he heard one of his many farm dogs thus address in his own tongue the cock, who was flapping his wings and crowing lustily and jumping from one hen's back to another and treading all in turn, saying, "O Chanty clear, how mean is thy wit and how shameless is thy conduct! Be he disappointed who brought thee up! Art thou not ashamed of thy doings on such a day as this?" "And what," asked the Rooster, "hath occurred this day?" When the dog answered, "Dost thou not know that our master is this day making ready for his death? His wife is resolved that he shall disclose the secret taught to him by Allah, and the moment he so doeth he shall surely die. We dogs are all a mourning, but thou clappest thy wings and clarionest thy loudest and treadest hen after hen. Is this an hour for pastime and pleasuring? Art thou not ashamed of thyself?" "Then by Allah," quoth the cock, "is our master a lackwit and a man scanty of sense. If he cannot manage matters with a single wife, his life is not worth prolonging. Now I have some 50 dame partlets, and I please this and provoke that, and starve one and stuff another. And through my governance they are all well under my control. This our master pretendeth to wit and wisdom, and he hath but one wife, and yet knoweth not how to manage her. Asked the dog, What then, O cock, should the master do to win clear of his strait? He should arise forthright, answered the cock, and take some twigs from yon mulberry tree, and give her a regular backbasting and rib roasting till she cry, I repent, O my lord, I will never ask thee a question as long as I live. Then let him beat her once more and soundly, and when he shall have done this he shall sleep free from care and enjoy life. But this master of ours owns neither sense nor judgment. Now, daughter Shahrazad, continued the Wazir, I will do to thee as did that husband to that wife. Said Shahrazad, And what did he do? He replied, When the merchant heard the wise words spoken by his cock to his dog, he arose in haste and sought his wife's chamber after cutting for her some mulberry twigs and hiding them there, and then he called to her, Come into the closet, that I may tell thee the secret, while no one seeth me, and then die. She entered with him, and he locked the door and came down with her, with so sound a beating of back and shoulders, ribs, arms and legs, saying the while, Wilt thou ever be asking questions about what concerneth thee not? That she was well nigh senseless. Presently she cried out, I am of the repentant. By Allah, I will ask thee no more questions, and indeed I repent sincerely and wholesomely. Then she kissed his hand and feet, and he led her out of the room submissive as a wife should be. Her parents and all the company rejoiced, and sadness and mourning were changed into joy and gladness. Thus the merchant learned family discipline from his cock, and he and his wife lived together the happiest of lives until death. And thou also, my daughter, continued the Wazir, unless thou turn from this matter, I will do by thee what that trader did to his wife. But she answered him with much decision, I will never desist, O my father, nor shall this tale change my purpose. Leave such talk and tattle. I will not listen to thy words, and if thou deny me, I will marry myself to him despite the nose of thee. And first I will go up to the king myself, and alone, and I will say to him, I prayed my father to wive me with thee, but he refused, being resolved to disappoint his lord, grudging the like of me to the like of thee. Her father asked, Must this needs be? And she answered, Even so. Hereupon the Wazir, being weary of lamenting and contending, persuading and dissuading her, all to no purpose, went up to King Shahryar, and after blessing him and kissing the ground before him, told him all about his dispute with his daughter from first to last, and how he designed to bring her to him that night. The king wondered with exceeding wonder, for he had made an especial exception of the Wazir's daughter, and said to him, O most faithful of counsellors, how is this? Thou wottest that I have sworn by the Raiser of the heavens, that after I have gone in to her this night, I shall say to thee on the morrow's morning, Take her and slay her. And if thou slay her not, I will slay thee in her stead without fail. Allah guide thee to glory and lengthen thy life, O King of the age, answered the Wazir. It is she that hath so determined. All this I have told her and more, but she will not hearken to me, and she persisteth in passing this coming night with the King's majesty. So Shahryar rejoiced greatly and said, "'Tis well, go get her ready and this night bring her to me." The Wazir returned to his daughter and reported to her the command, saying, "Allah make not thy father desolate by thy loss." But Shahrazad rejoiced with exceeding joy and got ready all she required and said to her younger sister Dunyazad, "Note well what directions I entrust to thee. When I have gone in to the King I will send for thee, and when thou comest to me and seest that he hath had his carnal will of me, do thou say to me, 'O my sister, an thou not be sleepy, relate to me some new story, delectable and delightsome, the better to speed our waking hours; and I will tell thee a tale which shall be our deliverance, if so Allah please, and which shall turn the King from his bloodthirsty custom." Dunyazad answered, "With love and gladness." So when it was night, their father the Wazir carried Shahrazad to the King, who was gladdened at the sight and asked, "Hast thou brought me my need?" And he answered, "I have." But when the King took her to his bed and fell to toying with her and wished to go in to her, she wept, which made him ask, "What aileth thee?" She replied, "O King of the age, I have a younger sister and fief would I take leave of her this night before I see the dawn." So he sent at once for Dunyazad and she came and kissed the ground between his hands, when he permitted her to take her seat near the foot of the couch. Then the King arose and did away with his bride's maidenhead, and the three fell asleep. But when it was midnight Shahrazad awoke and signalled to her sister Dunyazad, who sat up and said, "Allah upon thee, O my sister, recite to us some new story, delightsome and delectable, wherewith to while away the waking hours of our latter night." "With joy and goodly gree," answered Shahrazad, "if this pious and auspicious King permit me." "Tell on," quoth the King, who chanced to be sleepless and restless and therefore was pleased with the prospect of hearing her story. So Shahrazad rejoiced, and thus on the first night of the 1,000 Nights and a Night she began with the tale of the trader and the Jinni. It is related, O auspicious King, that there was a merchant of the merchants who had much wealth and business in various cities. Now on a day he mounted horse and went forth to recover monies in certain towns, and the heat sore oppressed him. So he sat beneath a tree and, putting his hand into his saddle bags, took thence some broken bread and dried dates and began to break his fast. When he had ended eating the dates he threw away the stones with force and lo! an Ifrit appeared, huge of stature and brandishing a drawn sword, wherewith he approached the merchant and said, "Stand up that I may slay thee, even as thou slewest my son." Asked the merchant, "How have I slain thy son?" And he answered, "When thou atest dates and threwest away the stones they struck my son full in the breast as he was walking by, so that he died forthwith." Quoth the merchant, "Verily from Allah we proceeded and unto Allah we are returning. There is no Majesty and there is no Might save in Allah the Glorious, the Great! If I slew thy son, I slew him by chance medley. I pray thee now pardon me." Rejoined the Jinni, "There is no help but I must slay thee." Then he seized him and dragged him along and, casting him to the earth, raised the sword to strike him; whereupon the merchant wept and said, "I commit my case to Allah," and began repeating these couplets: Containeth time a twain of days, this of blessing, that of bane, and holdeth life a twain of halves, this of pleasure, that of pain. Cease not when blows the hurricane, sweeping stark and striking strong. None save the forest giant feels the suffering of the strain. How many trees earth nourisheth, of the dry and of the green, yet none of those which bear the fruits for cast of stone complain. Seest not how corpses rise and float on the surface of the tide, while pearls of price lie hidden in the deepest of the main? In heaven are unnumbered the many of the stars, yet ne'er a star but sun and moon by eclipse is o'erta'en. Well judgest thou the days that saw thy faring sound and well, and countedst not the pangs and pain whereof Fate is never fain. The nights have kept thee safe and the safety brought thee pride, but bliss and blessings of the night are genderers of bane. When the merchant ceased repeating these verses the Jinni said to him, "Cut thy words short by Allah, needs must I slay thee." But the merchant spake him thus, "Know, O thou Ifrit, that I have debts due to me and much wealth and children and a wife and many pledges in hand, so permit me to go home and discharge to every claimant his claim, and I will come back to thee at the head of the new year. Allah be my testimony and surety that I will return to thee, and then thou mayest do with me as thou wilt, and Allah is witness to what I say." The Jinni took sure promise of him and let him go; so he returned to his own city and transacted his business and rendered to all men their dues, and after informing his wife and children of what had betided him, he appointed a guardian and dwelt with them for a full year. Then he arose and made the Wuzu ablution to purify himself before death, and took his shroud under his arm and bade farewell to his people, his neighbours and all his kith and kin, and went forth despite his own nose. Then they began weeping and wailing and beating their breasts over him, but he travelled until he arrived at the same garden, and the day of his arrival was the head of the new year. As he sat weeping over what had befallen him, behold, a Shaykh, a very ancient man, drew near leading a chained gazelle, and he saluted the merchant and wishing him long life said, "What is the cause of thy sitting in this place, and thou alone, and this be a resort of evil spirits?" The merchant related to him what had come to pass with the Ifrit, and the old man, the owner of the gazelle, wondered and said, "By Allah, O brother, thy faith is none other than exceeding faith, and thy story right strange. Were it graven with gravers on the eye corners, it were a warner to whoso would be warned." Then seating himself near the merchant he said, "By Allah, O my brother, I will not leave thee until I see what may come to pass with thee and this Ifrit." And presently as he sat and the two were at talk, the merchant began to feel fear and terror and exceeding grief and sorrow beyond relief and ever growing care and extreme despair. And the owner of the gazelle was hard by his side, when behold, a second Shaykh approached them, and with him were two dogs, both of greyhound breed and both black. The second old man, after saluting them with the salam, also asked them of their tidings and said, "What causeth you to sit in this place, a dwelling of the Jann?" So they told him the tale from beginning to end, and their stay there had not lasted long before there came up a third Shaykh, and with him a she mule of bright bay coat, and he saluted them and asked them why they were seated in that place. So they told him the story from first to last, and of no avail, O my master, is a twice told tale. There he sat down with them, and lo! a dust cloud advanced, and a mighty send devil appeared amidmost of the waste. Presently the cloud opened and behold, within it was that Jinni, hending in hand a drawn sword, while his eyes were shooting fire sparks of rage. He came up to them and, haling away the merchant from among them, cried to them, "Arise that I may slay thee as thou slewest my son, the life stuff of my liver." The merchant wailed and wept, and the three old men began sighing and crying and weeping and wailing with their companion. Presently the first old man, the owner of the gazelle, came out from among them and kissed the hand of the Ifrit and said, "O Jinni, thou crown of the kings of the Jann, were I to tell thee the story of me and this gazelle and thou shouldst consider it wondrous, wouldst thou give me a third part of this merchant's blood?" Then quoth the Jinni, "Even so, O Shaykh, if thou tell me this tale and I hold it a marvellous, then I will give thee a third of his blood." Thereupon the old man began to tell the first Shaykh's story. "Know, O Jinni, that this gazelle is the daughter of my paternal uncle, my own flesh and blood, and I married her when she was a young maid, and I lived with her well nigh 30 years, yet was I not blessed with issue by her. So I took me a concubine, who brought to me the boon of a male child, fair as the full moon, with eyes of lovely shine and eyebrows which formed one line and limbs of perfect design. Little by little he grew in stature and waxed tall, and when he was a lad 15 years old, it became needful I should journey to certain cities, and I travelled with great store of goods. But the daughter of my uncle, this gazelle, had learned gramarye and egromancy and clerkly craft from her childhood, so she bewitched that son of mine to a calf, and my handmaid, his mother, to a heifer, and made them over to the herdsman's care. Now when I returned after a long time from my journey and asked for my son and his mother, she answered me, saying, Thy slave girl is dead, and thy son hath fled, and I know not whither he is sped. So I remained for a whole year with grieving heart and streaming eyes, until the time came for the great festival of Allah. Then sent I to my herdsman, bidding him choose for me a fat heifer, and he brought me one which was the damsel, my handmaid, whom this gazelle had ensorcelled. I tucked up my sleeves and skirt and, taking a knife, proceeded to cut her throat, but she lowed aloud and wept bitter tears. Thereat I marvelled and pity seized me, and I held my hand, saying to the herd, "Bring me other than this." Then cried my cousin, "Slay her, for I have not a fatter nor a fairer." Once more I went forward to sacrifice her, but she again lowed aloud, upon which in ruth I refrained and commanded the herdsman to slay her and flay her. He killed her and skinned her, but found in her neither fat nor flesh, only hide and bone, and I repented when penitence availed me naught. I gave her to the herdsman and said to him, "Fetch me a fat calf." So he brought my son ensorcelled. When the calf saw me he broke his tether and ran to me, and fawned upon me and wailed and shed tears, so that I took pity on him and said to the herdsman, "Bring me a heifer and let this calf go." Thereupon my cousin, this gazelle, called aloud at me, saying, "Needs must thou kill this calf. This is a holy day and a blessed, whereon naught is slain save what be perfect pure, and we have not amongst our calves any fatter or fairer than this." Quoth I, "Look thou upon the condition of the heifer which I slaughtered at thy bidding, and how we turn from her in disappointment, and she profited us on no wise. And I repent with an exceeding repentance of having killed her, so this time I will not obey thy bidding for the sacrifice of this calf." Quoth she, "By Allah the Most Great, the Compassionating, the Compassionate! There is no help for it; thou must kill him on this holy day, and if thou kill him not, to me thou art no man, and I to thee am no wife." Now when I heard those hard words, not knowing her object, I went up to the calf, knife in hand,—And Shahrazad perceived the dawn of day and ceased to say her permitted say. Then quoth her sister to her, "How fair is thy tale and how grateful and how sweet and how tasteful!" And Shahrazad answered her, "What is this to that I could tell thee on the coming night, were I to live and the King would spare me?" Then said the King to himself, "By Allah, I will not slay her until I shall have heard the rest of her tale." So they slept the rest of that night in mutual embrace till day fully brake. Then the King went forth to his audience hall and the Wazir went up with his daughter's shroud under his arm. The King issued his orders and promoted this and deposed that until the end of the day, and he told the Wazir no whit of what had happened. But the Minister wondered thereat with exceeding wonder, and when the court broke up King Shahryar entered his palace. When it was the second night, said Dunyazad to her sister Shahrazad, "O my sister, finish for us that story of the merchant and the Jinni." And she answered, "With joy and goodly gree, if the King permit me." Then quoth the King, "Tell thy tale," and Shahrazad began in these words: It hath reached me, O auspicious King and heaven directed ruler, that when the merchant purposed the sacrifice of the calf, but saw it weeping, his heart relented and he said to the herdsman, "Keep the calf among my cattle." All this the old Shaykh told the Jinni who marvelled much at these strange words. Then the owner of the gazelle continued, "O Lord of the Kings of the Jann, this much took place and my uncle's daughter, this gazelle, looked on and saw it, and said, "Butcher me this calf, for surely it is a fat one." But I bade the herdsman take it away and he took it, and turned his face homewards. On the next day, as I was sitting in my own house, lo! the herdsman came and, standing before me, said, "O my master, I will tell thee a thing which shall gladden thy soul and shall gain me the gift of good tidings." I answered, Even so. Then said he, O merchant, I have a daughter, and she learned magic in her childhood from an old woman who lived with us. Yesterday, when thou gavest me the calf, I went into the house to her, and she looked upon it and veiled her face, then she wept and laughed alternately, and at last she said, O my father, hath mine honour become so cheap to thee that thou bringest in to me strange men? I asked her, Where be these strange men, and why wast thou laughing and crying? And she answered, Of a truth this calf which is with thee is the son of our master, the merchant, but he is ensorcelled by his stepdame who bewitched both him and his mother. Such is the cause of my laughing. Now the reason of his weeping is his mother, for that his father slew her unawares. Then I marvelled at this with exceeding marvel, and hardly made sure that day had dawned before I came to tell thee. When I heard, O Jinni, my herdsman's words, I went out with him, and I was drunken without wine from the excess of joy and gladness which came upon me, until I reached his house. There his daughter welcomed me and kissed my hand, and forthwith the calf came and fawned upon me as before. Quoth I to the herdsman's daughter, Is this true that thou sayest of this calf? Quoth she, Yea, O my master, he is thy son, the very core of thy heart. I rejoiced and said to her, O maiden, if thou wilt release him, thine shall be whatever cattle and property of mine are under thy father's hand. She smiled and answered, O my master, I have no greed for the goods, nor will I take them save on two conditions. The first, that thou marry me to thy son, and the second, that I may bewitch her who bewitched him, and imprison her, otherwise I cannot be safe from her malice and malpractices. Now when I heard, O Jinni, these, the words of the herdsman's daughter, I replied, Beside what thou askest, all the cattle and the household stuff in thy father's charge are thine, and as for the daughter of my uncle, her blood is lawful to thee. When I had spoken, she took a cup and filled it with water, then she recited a spell over it and sprinkled it upon the calf, saying, If Almighty Allah created thee a calf, remain so shaped, and change not; but if thou be enchanted, return to thy whilom form, by command of Allah Most Highest. And lo, he trembled and became a man. Then I fell on his neck and said, Allah upon thee, tell me all that the daughter of my uncle did by thee and by thy mother. And when he told me what had come to pass between them, I said, O my son, Allah favoured thee with one to restore thee, and thy right hath returned to thee. Then, O Jinni, I married the herdsman's daughter to him, and she transformed my wife into this gazelle, saying, Her shape is as comely and by no means loathsome. After this she abode with us night and day, day and night, till the Almighty took her to Himself. When she deceased, my son fared forth to the cities of Hind, even to the city of this man who hath done to thee what hath been done. And I also took this gazelle, my cousin, and wandered with her from town to town, seeking tidings of my son, till destiny drove me to this place, where I saw the merchant sitting in tears. Such is my tale. Quoth the Jinni, This story is indeed strange, and therefore I grant thee the third part of his blood. Thereupon the second old man, who owned the two greyhounds, came up and said, O Jinni, if I recount to thee what befell me from my brothers, these two hounds, and thou see that it is a tale even more wondrous and marvellous than what thou hast heard, wilt thou grant me also the third of this man's blood? Replied the Jinni, Thou hast my word for it, if thine adventures be more marvellous and wondrous. Thereupon he thus began the second Shaykh's story. End of Section 2 of the Book of 1000 Nights and a Night. Recorded by Gazina in January 2008.
The Book of 1000 Nights and a Night, Section 3. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For further information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Volume 1 of the Book of 1000 Nights and a Night, translated by Richard Burton. Section 3. Know, O Lord of the Kings of the Jann, that these two dogs are my brothers, and I am the third. Now, when our father died and left us a capital of 3000 gold pieces, I opened a shop with my share, and bought and sold therein, and in like guise did my two brothers, each setting up a shop. But I had been in business no long while before the elder sold his stock for 1000 dinars, and after buying outfit and merchandise went his ways to foreign parts. He was absent one whole year with the caravan, but one day as I sat in my shop, behold, a beggar stood before me asking alms, and I said to him, "Allah open thee another door!" Whereupon he answered, weeping the while, "Am I so changed that thou knowest me not?" Then I looked at him narrowly, and lo! it was my brother; so I rose to him and welcomed him. Then I seated him in my shop and put questions concerning his case. "Ask me not," answered he, "my wealth is a waste and my state hath waxed unstated." So I took him to the Hammam bath and clad him in a suit of my own and gave him lodging in my house. Moreover, after looking over the accounts of my stock in trade and the profits of my business, I found that industry had gained me 1000 dinars, while my principal, the head of my wealth, amounted to 2000. So I shared the whole with him, saying, "Assume that thou hast made no journey abroad, but hast remained at home, and be not cast down by thine ill luck." He took the share in great glee and opened for himself a shop, and matters went on quietly for a few nights and days. But presently my second brother, yon other dog, also setting his heart upon travel, sold off what goods and stock in trade he had, and, albeit we tried to stay him, he would not be stayed. He laid in an outfit for the journey and fared forth with certain wayfarers. After an absence of a whole year he came back to me, even as my elder brother had come back; and when I said to him, "O my brother, did I not dissuade thee from travel?" he shed tears and cried, "O my brother, this be Destiny's decree. Here I am a mere beggar, penniless, and without a shirt to my back." So I led him to the bath, O Jinni, and clothing him in new clothes of my own wear, I went with him to my shop and served him with meat and drink. Furthermore I said to him, "O my brother, I am wont to cast up my shop accounts at the head of every year, and whatso I shall find of surplusage is between me and thee." So I proceeded, O Ifrit, to strike a balance, and finding 2000 dinars of profit, I returned praises to the Creator, be He extolled and exalted, and made over one half to my brother, keeping the other to myself. Thereupon he busied himself with opening a shop, and on this wise we abode many days. After a time my brothers began pressing me to travel with them, but I refused, saying, "What gained ye by travel voyage that I should gain thereby?" As I would not give ear to them, we went back each to his own shop, where we bought and sold as before. They kept urging me to travel for a whole 12 month, but I refused to do so till full 6 years were past and gone, when I consented with these words, "O my brothers, here am I, your companion of travel: now let me see what monies you have by you." I found, however, that they had not a doit, having squandered their substance in high diet and drinking and carnal delights. Yet I spoke not a word of reproach; so far from it, I looked over my shop accounts once more and sold what goods and stock in trade were mine; and finding myself the owner of 6000 ducats, I gladly proceeded to divide that sum in halves, saying to my brothers, "These 3000 gold pieces are for me and for you to trade withal," adding, "Let us bury the other moiety under ground that it may be of service in case any harm befal us; in which case each shall take 1000 wherewith to open shops." Both replied, "Right is thy recking," and I gave to each one his 1,000 gold pieces, keeping the same sum for myself, to wit 1,000 dinars. We then got ready suitable goods and hired a ship and, having embarked our merchandise, proceeded on our voyage, day following day, a full month, after which we arrived at a city, where we sold our venture, and for every piece of gold we gained 10. And as we turned again to our voyage we found on the shore of the sea a maiden clad in worn and ragged gear, and she kissed my hand and said, "O master, is there kindness in thee and charity? I can make thee a fitting return for them." I answered, "Even so! Truly in me are benevolence and good works, even though thou render me no return." Then she said, "Take me to wife, O my master, and carry me to thy city, for I have given myself to thee. So do me a kindness and I am of those who be meet for good works and charity. I will make thee a fitting return for these, and be thou not shamed by my condition." When I heard her words my heart yearned towards her, in such sort as willed it Allah (be He extolled and exalted!), and took her and clothed her and made ready for her a fair resting place in the vessel, and honourably entreated her. So we voyaged on, and my heart became attached to her with exceeding attachment, and I was separated from her neither night nor day, and I paid more regard to her than to my brothers. Then they were estranged from me and waxed jealous of my wealth and the quantity of merchandise I had, and their eyes were opened covetously upon all my property. So they took counsel to murder me and seize my wealth, saying, "Let us slay our brother and all his monies will be ours." And Satan made this deed seem fair in their sight; so when they found me in privacy, and I sleeping by my wife's side, they took us both up and cast us into the sea. My wife awoke startled from her sleep and forthright becoming an Ifritah, she bore me up and carried me to an island and disappeared for a short time; but she returned in the morning and said, "Here am I, thy faithful slave, who hath made thee due recompense; for I bore thee up in the waters and saved thee from death by command of the Almighty. Know that I am a Jinniyah, and as I saw thee my heart loved thee by will of the Lord, for I am a believer in Allah and in His Apostle, whom Heaven bless and preserve! Thereupon I came to thee conditioned as thou sawest me, and thou didst marry me, and see now I have saved thee from sinking. But I am angered against thy brothers and assuredly I must slay them." When I heard her story I was surprised and, thanking her for all she had done, I said, "But as to slaying my brothers, this must not be." Then I told her the tale of what had come to pass with them from the beginning of our lives to the end, and on hearing it quoth she, "This night will I fly as a bird over them and will sink their ship and slay them." Quoth I, "Allah upon thee, do not thus; for the proverb saith, 'O thou who doest good to him that doth evil, leave the evil doer to his evil deeds.' Moreover, they are still my brothers." But she rejoined, "By Allah, there is no help for it but I slay them." I humbled myself before her for their pardon, whereupon she bore me up and flew away with me till at last she set me down on the terrace roof of my own house. I opened the doors and took up what I had hidden in the ground, and after I had saluted the folk I opened my shop and bought me merchandise. Now when night came on I went home and there I saw these two hounds tied up; and, when they sighted me, they arose and whined and fawned upon me; but ere I knew what happened my wife said, "These two dogs be thy brothers." I answered, "And who hath done this thing by them?" And she rejoined, "I sent a message to my sister and she entreated them on this wise, nor shall these two be released from their present shape till 10 years shall have passed. And now I have arrived at this place on my way to my wife's sister, that she may deliver them from this condition, after their having endured it for half a score of years. As I was wending onwards I saw this young man, who acquainted me with what had befallen him, and I determined not to fare hence until I should see what might occur between thee and him. Such is my tale." Then said the Jinni, "Surely this is a strange story, and therefore I give thee the third portion of his blood and his crime." Thereupon quoth the third Shaykh, the master of the mare mule, to the Jinni, "I can tell thee a tale more wondrous than these two, so thou grant me the remainder of his blood and his offence." And the Jinni answered, "So be it." Then the old man began. The Third Shaykh's Story. Know, O Sultan and head of the Jann, that this mule was my wife. Now it so happened that I went forth and was absent one whole year, and when I returned from my journey I came to her by night, and saw a black slave lying with her on the carpet bed, and they were talking and dallying and laughing and kissing and playing the close buttock game. When she saw me she rose and came hurriedly at me with a gugglet of water, and muttering spells over it she besprinkled me and said, "Come forth from this thy shape into the shape of a dog." And I became on the instant a dog. She drove me out of the house and I ran through the doorway nor ceased running until I came to a butcher's stall, where I stopped and began to eat what bones were there. When the stall owner saw me, he took me and led me into his house; but as soon as his daughter had sight of me she veiled her face from me, crying out, "Dost thou bring men to me and dost thou come in with them to me?" Her father asked, "Where is the man?" And she answered, "This dog is a man whom his wife hath ensorcelled, and I am able to release him." When her father heard her words he said, "Allah upon thee, O my daughter, release him!" So she took a gugglet of water and, after uttering words over it, sprinkled upon me a few drops, saying, "Come forth from that form into thy former form," and I returned to my natural shape. Then I kissed her hand and said, "I wish thou wouldest transform my wife even as she transformed me." Thereupon she gave me some water, saying, "As soon as thou see her asleep, sprinkle this liquid upon her and speak what words thou heardest me utter; so shall she become whatsoever thou desirest." I went to my wife and found her fast asleep, and while sprinkling the water upon her I said, "Come forth from that form into the form of a mare mule." So she became on the instant a she mule, and she it is whom thou seest with thine eyes, O Sultan and head of the Kings of the Jann. Then the Jinni turned towards her and said, "Is this sooth?" And she nodded her head and replied by signs, "Indeed 'tis the truth, for such is my tale and this is what hath befallen me." Now when the old man had ceased speaking the Jinni shook with pleasure and gave him the third of the merchant's blood; and Shahrazad perceived the dawn of the day and ceased saying her permitted say. Then quoth Dunyazad, "O my sister, how pleasant is thy tale and how tasteful, how sweet and how grateful!" She replied, "And what is this compared with that I could tell thee, the night to come, if I live and the King spare me?" Then thought the King, "By Allah, I will not slay her until I hear the rest of her tale, for truly it is wondrous." So they rested that night in mutual embrace until the dawn. After this the King went forth to his hall of estate, and the Wazir and the troops came in and the court was crowded, and the King gave orders and judged and appointed and deposed, bidding and forbidding during the rest of the day. Then the Divan broke up and King Shahryar entered his palace. When it was the third night and the King had had his will of the Wazir's daughter, Dunyazad her sister said to her, "Finish for us that tale of thine;" and she replied, "With joy and goodly gree. It hath reached me, O auspicious King, that when the third old man told a tale to the Jinni more wondrous than the two preceding, the Jinni marvelled with exceeding marvel and, shaking with delight, cried, "Lo! I have given thee the remainder of the merchant's punishment and for thy sake have I released him." Thereupon the merchant embraced the old men and thanked them, and these Shaykhs wished him joy on being saved and fared forth each one for his own city. Yet this tale is not more wondrous than the fisherman's story. Asked the King, "What is the fisherman's story?" and she answered by relating the tale of The Fisherman and the Jinni. It hath reached me, O auspicious King, that there was a fisherman, well stricken in years, who had a wife and three children, and withal was of poor condition. Now it was his custom to cast his net every day 4 times, and no more. On a day he went forth about noontide to the sea shore, where he laid down his basket and, tucking up his shirt and plunging into the water, made a cast with his net and waited till it settled to the bottom. Then he gathered the cords together and haled away at it, but found it weighty, and however much he drew it landwards he could not pull it up; so he carried the ends ashore and drove a stake into the ground and made the net fast to it. Then he stripped and dived into the water all about the net, and left not off working hard until he had brought it up. He rejoiced thereat and, donning his clothes, went to the net, where he found in it a dead jackass, which had torn the meshes. Now when he saw it he exclaimed in his grief, "There is no Majesty and there is no Might save in Allah the Glorious, the Great!" Then quoth he, "This is a strange manner of daily bread!" And he began reciting in extempore verse:— O toiler through the glooms of night, in peril and in pain, thy toiling stint for daily bread comes not by might and main. Seest thou not the fisher seek afloat upon the sea his bread, while glimmer stars of night, as set in tangled skein? Anon he plungeth in despite the buffet of the waves, the while to sight the bellying net his eager glances strain; Till, joying at the night's success, a fish he bringeth home, whose gullet by the hook of fate was caught and cut in twain. When buys that fish of him a man who spent the hours of night, reckless of cold and wet and gloom, in ease and comfort fain. Laud to the Lord who gives to this, to that denies his wishes, and dooms one toil and catch the prey, and other eat the fishes. Then quoth he, "Up and to it! I am sure of His beneficence, Inshallah!" So he continued:— When thou art seized of evil fate, assume the noble soul's long suffering, 'tis thy best. Complain not to the creature, this be plaint from one most ruthful to the ruthlessest. The Fisherman, when he had looked at the dead ass, got it free of the toils and wrung out and spread his net. Then he plunged into the sea, saying, "In Allah's name!" and made a cast and pulled at it, but it grew heavy and settled down more firmly than the first time. Now he thought that there were fish in it, and he made it fast and, doffing his clothes, went into the water and dived and haled until he drew it up upon dry land. Then found he in it a large earthen pitcher which was full of sand and mud; and seeing this he was greatly troubled and began repeating these verses:— Forbear, O troubles of the world, and pardon an ye nill forbear! I went to seek my daily bread, I find that breadless I must fare. For neither handcraft brings me aught, nor Fate allots to me a share. How many fools the Pleiads reach, while darkness whelms the wise and ware. So he prayed pardon of Allah and, throwing away the jar, wrung his net and cleansed it, and returned to the sea the 3rd time to cast his net and waited till it had sunk. Then he pulled at it and found therein potsherds and broken glass, whereupon he began to speak these verses:— He is to thee that daily bread thou canst nor loose nor bind, nor pen nor writ avail thee aught thy daily bread to find. For joy and daily bread are what Fate deigneth to allow. This soil is sad and sterile ground, while that makes glad the hind. The shafts of time and life bear down full many a man of worth, while bearing up to high degree wights of ignoble mind. So come thou Death, for verily life is not worth a straw, when lo! the falcon falls withal, the mallard wings the wind. No wonder 'tis thou seest how the great of soul and mind a poor and many a loser carle, to height of luck designed. This bird shall overfly the world from east to furthest west, and that shall win her every wish, though ne'er she leave the nest. Then raising his eyes heavenwards he said, O my God, verily thou wottest that I cast not my net each day save 4 times. The third is done, and as yet thou hast vouchsafed me nothing; so this time, O my God, deign give me my daily bread. Then, having called on Allah's name, he again threw his net and waited its sinking and settling; whereupon he haled at it but could not draw it in, for that it was entangled at the bottom. He cried out in his vexation, "There is no Majesty and there is no Might save in Allah!" and he began reciting, "Fie on this wretched world, and so it be I must be whelmed by grief and misery. Though gladsome be man's lot when dawns the morn, he drains the cup of woe ere eve he see. Yet was I one of whom the world when asked, whose lot is happiest, oft would say, 'Tis he." Thereupon he stripped and diving down to the net busied himself with it till it came to land. Then he opened the meshes and found therein a cucumber shaped jar of yellow copper, evidently full of something, whose mouth was made fast with a leaden cap, stamped with the seal ring of our lord Sulayman, son of David, Allah accept the twain! Seeing this the Fisherman rejoiced and said, "If I sell it in the brass bazar 'tis worth 10 golden dinars." He shook it and finding it heavy continued, "Would to Heaven I knew what is herein! But I must and will open it and look to its contents and store it in my bag and sell it in the brass market." And taking out a knife he worked at the lead till he had loosened it from the jar; then he laid the cup on the ground and shook the vase to pour out whatever might be inside. He found nothing in it, whereat he marvelled with an exceeding marvel. But presently there came forth from the jar a smoke which spired heavenwards into ether, whereat he again marvelled with mighty marvel, and which trailed along earth's surface till presently, having reached its full height, the thick vapour condensed and became an Ifrit huge of bulk, whose crest touched the clouds while his feet were on the ground. His head was as a dome, his hands like pitchforks, his legs long as masts, and his mouth big as a cave. His teeth were like large stones, his nostrils ewers, his eyes 2 lamps, and his look was fierce and lowering. Now when the Fisherman saw the Ifrit his side muscles quivered, his teeth chattered, his spittle dried up and he became blind about what to do. Upon this the Ifrit looked at him and cried, "There is no god but the God, and Sulayman is the Prophet of God," presently adding, "O Apostle of Allah, slay me not; never again will I gainsay thee in word nor sin against thee in deed." Quoth the Fisherman, "O Marid, didst thou say Sulayman the Apostle of Allah? And Sulayman is dead some 1800 years ago, and we are now in the last days of the world. What is thy story and what is thy account of thyself, and what is the cause of thy entering into this cucurbit?" When the evil spirit heard the words of the Fisherman, quoth he, "There is no god but the God. Be of good cheer, O Fisherman." Quoth the Fisherman, "Why biddest thou me to be of good cheer?" And he replied, "Because of thy having to die an ill death in this very hour." Said the Fisherman, "Thou deservest for thy good tidings the withdrawal of Heaven's protection, O thou distant one! Wherefore shouldest thou kill me, and what thing have I done to deserve death, I who freed thee from the jar and saved thee from the depths of the sea and brought thee up on the dry land?" Replied the Ifrit, "Ask me only what mode of death thou wilt die, and by what manner of slaughter shall I slay thee?" Rejoined the Fisherman, "What is my crime and wherefore such retribution?" Quoth the Ifrit, "Hear my story, O Fisherman!" And he answered, "Say on and be brief in thy saying, for of very sooth my life breath is in my nostrils." Thereupon quoth the Jinni, "Know that I am one among the heretical Jann and I sinned against Sulayman, David's son. On the twain be peace! I together with the famous Sakhr al Jinni; whereupon the Prophet sent his Minister Asaf son of Barkhiyah to seize me, and this Wazir brought me against my will and led me in bonds to him, I being downcast despite my nose; and he placed me standing before him like a suppliant. When Sulayman saw me he took refuge with Allah and bade me embrace the True Faith and obey his behests; but I refused; so, sending for this cucurbit, he shut me up therein and stopped it over with lead whereon he impressed the Most High Name, and gave his orders to the Jann who carried me off and cast me into the midmost of the ocean. There I abode 100 years, during which I said in my heart, "Whoso shall release me, him will I enrich for ever and ever." But the full century went by and when no one set me free, I entered upon the second 50, saying, "Whoso shall release me, for him I will open the hoards of the earth." Still no one set me free, and thus 400 years passed away. Then quoth I, "Whoso shall release me, for him will I fulfil 3 wishes." Yet no one set me free. Thereupon I waxed wroth with exceeding wrath and said to myself, "Whoso shall release me from this time forth, him will I slay, and I will give him choice of what death he will die. And now, as thou hast released me, I give thee full choice of deaths." The Fisherman, hearing the words of the Ifrit, said, "O Allah, the wonder of it, that I have not come to free thee save in these days!" adding, "Spare my life, so Allah spare thine, and slay me not, lest Allah set one to slay thee." Replied the contumacious one, "There is no help for it, die thou must; so ask me by way of boon what manner of death thou wilt die." Albeit thus certified, the Fisherman again addressed the Ifrit, saying, "Forgive me this my death as a generous reward for having freed thee." And the Ifrit, "Surely I would not slay thee save on account of that same release." "O Chief of the Ifrits," said the Fisherman, "I do thee good and thou requitest me with evil. In very sooth the old saw lieth not when it saith, We wrought them weal, they met our weal with ill. Such, by my life, is every bad man's labour. To him who benefits unworthy wights shall hap what happed to Amir's neighbour." Now when the Ifrit heard these words he answered, "No more of this talk, needs must I kill thee." Upon this the Fisherman said to himself, "This is a Jinni, and I am a man to whom Allah hath given a passably cunning wit; so I will now cast about to compass his destruction by my contrivance and by mine intelligence, even as he took counsel only of his malice and his frowardness." He began by asking the Ifrit, "Hast thou indeed resolved to kill me?" and receiving for all answer, "Even so," he cried, "Now in the Most Great Name graven on the seal ring of Sulayman the son of David, peace be with the Holy Twain! an I question thee on a certain matter, wilt thou give me a true answer?" The Ifrit replied, "Yea!" but hearing mention of the Most Great Name his wits were troubled and he said with trembling, "Ask and be brief." Quoth the Fisherman, "How didst thou fit into this bottle which would not hold thy hand, no, nor even thy foot, and how came it to be large enough to contain the whole of thee?" Replied the Ifrit, "What! dost not believe that I was all there?" And the Fisherman rejoined, "Nay, I will never believe it until I see thee inside with my own eyes."—And Shahrazad perceived the dawn of day and ceased to say her permitted say. When it was the Fourth Night, her sister said to her, "Please finish us this tale, an thou be not sleepy." So she resumed, "It hath reached me, O auspicious King, that when the Fisherman said to the Ifrit, I will never and nowise believe thee until I see thee inside it with mine own eyes, the evil spirit on the instant shook and became a vapour which condensed and entered the jar little and little, till all was well inside, when lo! the Fisherman in hot haste took the leaden cap with the seal and stoppered therewith the mouth of the jar and called out to the Ifrit, saying, "Ask me by way of boon what death thou wilt die." "By Allah!" I will throw thee into the sea before us, and here will I build me a lodge, and whoso cometh hither I will warn him against fishing and will say, in these waters abideth an Ifrit who giveth as a last favour a choice of deaths and fashion of slaughter to the man who saveth him." Now when the Ifrit heard this from the Fisherman and saw himself in limbo he was minded to escape, but this was prevented by Solomon's seal; so he knew that the Fisherman had cozened and outwitted him, and he waxed lowly and submissive and began humbly to say, "I did but jest with thee." But the other answered, "Thou liest, O vilest of the Ifrits and meanest and filthiest!" And he set off with the bottle for the seaside, the Ifrit calling out, "Nay, nay!" and he calling out, "Ay, ay!" Thereupon the evil spirit softened his voice and smoothed his speech and abased himself, saying, "What wouldest thou do with me, O Fisherman?" "I will throw thee back into the sea," he answered, "where thou hast been housed and homed for 1,800 years, and now I will leave thee therein till Judgment Day. Did I not say to thee, Spare me and Allah shall spare thee, and slay me not lest Allah slay thee? Yet thou spurnedst my supplication and hadst no intention save to deal ungraciously by me, and Allah hath now thrown thee into my hands, and I am cunninger than thou." Quoth the Ifrit, "Open for me and I may bring thee weal." Quoth the Fisherman, "Thou liest, thou accursed! My case with thee is that of the Wazir of King Yunan with the sage Duban." "And who was the Wazir of King Yunan and who was the sage Duban, and what was the story about them?" quoth the Ifrit; whereupon the Fisherman began to tell The Tale of the Wazir and the Sage Duban. Know, O thou Ifrit, that in days of yore and in ages long gone before, a King called Yunan reigned over the city of Fars of the land of Roum. He was a powerful ruler and a wealthy, who had armies and guards and allies of all the nations of men; but his body was afflicted with a leprosy which leeches and men of science failed to heal. He drank potions and he swallowed powders and he used unguents, but naught did him good and none among the host of physicians availed to procure him a cure. At last there came to his city a mighty healer of men and one well stricken in years, the sage Duban hight. This man was a reader of books, Greek, Persian, Roman, Arabian and Syrian; and he was skilled in astronomy and in leechcraft, the theoric as well as the practic. He was experienced in all that healeth and that hurteth the body, conversant with the virtues of every plant, grass and herb, and their benefit and bane; and he understood philosophy and had compassed the whole range of medical science and other branches of the knowledge tree. Now this physician passed but few days in the city ere he heard of the King's malady and all his bodily sufferings through the leprosy with which Allah had smitten him, and how all the doctors and wise men had failed to heal him. Upon this he sat up through the night in deep thought, and when broke the dawn and appeared the morn and light was again born and the sun greeted the good whose beauties the world adorn, he donned his handsomest dress and going in to King Yunan he kissed the ground before him. Then he prayed for the endurance of his honour and prosperity in fairest language and made himself known, saying, "O King, tidings have reached me of what befell thee through that which is in thy person, and how the host of physicians have proved themselves unavailing to abate it; and lo! I can cure thee, O King, and yet will I not make thee drink of draught or anoint thee with ointment." Now when King Yunan heard his words he said in huge surprise, "How wilt thou do this? By Allah, if thou make me whole, I will enrich thee even to thy son's son, and I will give thee sumptuous gifts, and whatso thou wishest shall be thine, and thou shalt be to me a cup companion and a friend." The King then robed him with a dress of honour and entreated him graciously and asked him, "Canst thou indeed cure me of this complaint without drug and unguent?" And he answered, "Yes, I will heal thee without the pains and penalties of medicine." The King marvelled with exceeding marvel and said, "O physician, when shall this be whereof thou speakest, and in how many days shall it take place? Haste thee, O my son!" He replied, "I hear and I obey. The cure shall begin to morrow." So saying he went forth from the presence and hired himself a house in the city for the better storage of his books and scrolls, his medicines and his aromatic roots. Then he set to work at choosing the fittest drugs and simples, and he fashioned a bat hollow within and furnished with a handle without, for which he made a ball, the two being prepared with consummate art. On the next day, when both were ready for use and wanted nothing more, he went up to the King and, kissing the ground between his hands, bade him ride forth on the parade ground, there to play at pal and mal. He was accompanied by his suite, Emirs and Chamberlains, Wazirs and lords of the realm; and ere he was seated the sage Duban came up to him and, handing him the bat, said, "Take this mal and grip it as I do, so; and now push for the plain and, leaning well over thy horse, drive the ball with all thy might until thy palm be moist and thy body perspire. Then the medicine will penetrate through thy palm and will permeate thy person. When thou hast done with playing and thou feelest the effects of the medicine, return to thy palace and make the Ghusl ablation in the Hammam bath and lay thee down to sleep. So shalt thou become whole. And now peace be with thee." Thereupon King Yunan took the bat from the sage and grasped it firmly; then, mounting steed, he drove the ball before him and galloped after it till he reached it, when he struck it with all his might, his palm gripping the bat handle the while; and he ceased not malling the ball till his hand waxed moist and his skin, perspiring, imbibed the medicine from the wood. Then the sage Duban knew that the drugs had penetrated his person and bade him return to the palace and enter the Hammam without stay or delay. So King Yunan forthright returned and ordered them to clear for him the bath. They did so, the carpet spreaders making all haste and the slaves all hurry, and got ready a change of raiment for the King. He entered the bath and made the total ablution long and thoroughly; then donned his clothes within the Hammam and rode therefrom to his palace, where he lay down and slept. End of Section 3 of the Book of 1000 Nights and a Night. The Book of 1000 Nights and a Night, Volume 1, Section 4. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For further information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. The Book of 1000 Nights and a Night, Volume 1, translated by Richard Burton, Section 4. Such was the case with King Yunan, but as regards the sage Duban, he returned home and slept as usual, and when morning dawned he repaired to the palace and craved audience. The King ordered him to be admitted. Then, having kissed the ground between his hands, in allusion to the King, he recited these couplets with solemn intonation. Happy is eloquence when thou art named her sire, but mourns she when as other man the title claimed. O Lord of fairest presence, whose illuming rays clear off the fogs of doubt, aye veiling deeds high famed. Ne'er cease thy face to shine like dawn and rise of morn, and never show Time's face with heat of ire inflamed. Thy grace hath favoured us with gifts that worked such wise as rain clouds raining on the hills by words inframed. Freely thou lavishedst thy wealth to rise on high, till won from time the heights whereat thy grandeur aimed. Now when the sage ceased reciting, the King rose quickly to his feet and fell on his neck. Then, seating him by his side, he bade dress him in a sumptuous dress, For it had so happened that when the King left the Hammam he looked on his body and saw no trace of leprosy. The skin was all clean as virgin silver. He joyed thereat with exceeding joy, his breast broadened with delight, and he felt thoroughly happy. Presently, when it was full day, he entered his audience hall and sat upon the throne of his kingship, whereupon his chamberlains and grandees flocked to the presence and with them the sage Duban. Seeing the leach, the King rose to him in honour and seated him by his side. Then the food trays furnished with the daintiest viands were brought and the physician ate with the King, nor did he cease companying him all that day. Moreover, at nightfall he gave the physician Duban 2000 gold pieces, besides the usual dress of honour and other gifts galore, and sent him home on his own steed. After the sage had fared forth, King Yunan again expressed his amazement at the leach's art, saying, "This man medicined my body from without, nor anointed me with aught of ointments. By Allah, surely this is none other than consummate skill! I am bound to honour such a man with rewards and distinction, and take him to my companion and my friend during the remainder of my days." So King Yunan passed the night in joy and gladness for that his body had been made whole and had thrown off so pernicious a malady. On the morrow the King went forth from his serraglio and sat upon his throne, and the lords of his state stood about him, and the Emirs and Wazirs sat as was their wont on his right hand and on his left. Then he asked for the sage Duban, who came in and kissed the ground before him, when the King rose to greet him and, seating him by his side, ate with him and wished him long life. Moreover, he robed him and gave him gifts and ceased not conversing with him until night approached. Then the King ordered him, by way of salary, 5 dresses of honour and 1000 dinars. The physician returned to his own house full of gratitude to the King. Now when next morning dawned, the King repaired to his audience hall, and his lords and nobles surrounded him, and his chamberlains and his ministers, as the white encloseth the black of the eye. Now the King had a Wazir among his Wazirs unsightly to look upon, an ill omened spectacle, sordid, ungenerous, full of envy and evil will. When this minister saw the King place the physician near him and give him all these gifts, he jaloused him and planned to do him harm, as in the saying on such subject, envy lurks in everybody, and the saying, oppression hideth in every heart, power revealeth it, and weakness concealeth it. Then the minister came before the King and, kissing the ground between his hands, said, "O King of the age and of all time, thou in whose benefits I have grown to manhood, I have weighty advice to offer thee, and if I withhold it I were a son of adultery and no true born man. Wherefore, an thou order me to disclose it, I will do so forthwith." Quoth the King, and he was troubled at the words of the minister, "And what is this counsel of thine?" Quoth he, "O glorious monarch, the wise of old have said, Whoso regardeth not the end hath not fortune to friend; and indeed I have lately seen the King on far other than the right way. For he lavisheth largesse on his enemy, on one whose object is the decline and fall of his kingship. To this man he hath shown favour, honouring him with over honour and making of him an intimate. Wherefore I fear for the King's life." The King, who was much troubled and changed colour, asked, "Whom dost thou suspect and anent whom dost thou hint?" And the minister answered, "O King, an thou be asleep, wake up! I point to the physician Duban." Rejoined the King, "Fie upon thee! This is a true friend who is favoured by me above all men, because he cured me with some thing which I held in my hand, and he healed my leprosy which had baffled all physicians. Indeed he is one whose like may not be found in these days, no, not in the whole world, from furthest east to utmost west. And it is of such a man thou sayest such hard sayings. Now from this day forward I allot him a settled solde and allowances, every month 1000 gold pieces, and were I to share with him my realm 'twere but a little matter." Perforce I must suspect that thou speakest on this wise from mere envy and jealousy, as they relate of the King Sindibad."—And Shahrazad perceived the dawn of the day and ceased saying her permitted say. Then quoth Dunyazad, "O my sister, how pleasant is thy tale and how tasteful, how sweet and how grateful!" She replied, "And where is this compared with what I could tell thee on the coming night, if the King deign spare my life?" Then said the King in himself, "By Allah, I will not slay her until I hear the rest of her tale, for truly it is wondrous." So they rested that night in mutual embrace until the dawn. Then the King went forth to his hall of rule and the Wazir and the troops came in, and the audience chamber was thronged, and the King gave orders and judged and appointed and deposed and bade and forbade during the rest of that day, till the court broke up and King Shahryar returned to his palace. When it was the fifth night, her sister said, "Do you finish for us thy story, if thou be not sleepy." And she resumed, "It hath reached me, O auspicious King and mighty monarch, that King Yunan said to his Minister, "O Wazir, thou art one whom the evil spirit of envy hath possessed because of this physician, and thou plottest for my putting him to death, after which I should repent me full sorely, even as repented King Sindibad for killing his falcon." Quoth the Wazir, "Pardon me, O King of the age, how was that?" So the King began the story of King Sindibad and his Falcon. It is said (but Allah is all knowing) that there was a King of the King of Fars, who was fond of pleasuring and diversion, especially coursing and hunting. He had reared a falcon which he carried all night on his fist, and whenever he went a chasing he took with him this bird, and he bade make for her a golden cuplet hung around her neck to give her drink therefrom. One day, as the King was sitting quietly in his palace, behold, the High Falconer of the household suddenly addressed him, "O King of the age, this is indeed a day fit for birding." The King gave orders accordingly and set out taking the hawk on fist, and they fared merrily forwards till they met a Wady, where they planted a circle of nets for the chase, when lo! a gazelle came within the toils and the King cried, "Whoso alloweth yon gazelle to spring over his head and loseth her, that man will I surely slay." They narrowed the nets about the gazelle when she drew near the King's station and, planting herself on her hind quarter, crossed her forehand over her breast as if about to kiss the earth before the King. He bowed his brow low in acknowledgment to the beast, when she bounded high over his head and took the way of the waist. Thereupon the King turned towards his troops and seeing them winking and pointing at him, he asked, "O Wazir, what are my men saying?" And the Minister answered, "They say thou didst proclaim that whoso alloweth the gazelle to spring over his head, that man shall be put to death." Quoth the King, "Now by the life of my head, I will follow her up till I bring her back." So he set off, galloping on the gazelle's trail, and gave not over tracking till he reached the foothills of a mountain chain, where the quarry made for a cave. Then the King cast off at it the falcon which presently caught it up and, swooping down, drove her talons into its eyes, bewildering and blinding it; and the King drew his mace and struck a blow which rolled the game over. He then dismounted and, after cutting the antelope's throat and flaying the body, hung it to the pommel of his saddle. Now the time was that of the siesta, and the wold was parched and dry, nor was any water to be found anywhere, and the King thirsted and his horse also; so he went about searching till he saw a tree dropping water as it were melted butter from its boughs. Thereupon the King, who wore gauntlets of skin to guard him against poisons, took the cup from the hawk's neck and, filling it with the water, set it before the bird, and lo! the falcon struck it with her pounces and upset the liquid. The King filled it a second time with the dripping drops, thinking his hawk was thirsty, but the bird again struck at the cup with her talons and overturned it. Then the King waxed wroth with the hawk and, filling the cup a third time, offered it to his horse, but the hawk upset it with a flirt of wings, Quoth the King, "Allah confound thee, thou unluckiest of flying things! Thou keepest me from drinking and thou deprivest thyself also and the horse." So he struck the falcon with his sword and cut off her wing. But the bird raised her head and said by signs, "Look at that which hangeth on the tree." The King lifted up his eyes accordingly and caught sight of a brood of vipers whose poisoned drops he mistook for water. Thereupon he repented him of having struck off his falcon's wing and, mounting horse, fared on with the dead gazelle till he arrived at the camp, his starting place. He threw the quarry to the cook, saying, "Take and broil it," and sat down on his chair, the falcon being still on his fist, when suddenly the bird gasped and died. Whereupon the King cried out in sorrow and remorse for having slain that falcon which had saved his life. Now this is what occurred in the case of King Sindibad, and I am assured that were I to do as thou desirest, I should repent even as the man who killed his parrot. Quoth the Wazir, "And how was that?" And the King began to tell The Tale of the Husband and the Parrot. A certain man, and a merchant to boot, had married a fair wife, a woman of perfect beauty and grace, symmetry and loveliness, of whom he was mad jealous, and who contrived successfully to keep him from travel. At last, an occasion compelling him to leave her, he went to the bird market and bought him for 100 gold pieces a she parrot which he set in his house to act as duenna, expecting her to acquaint him on his return with what had passed during the whole time of his absence; for the bird was kenning and cunning, and never forgot what she had seen and heard. Now his fair wife had fallen in love with a young Turk, who used to visit her, and she feasted him by day and lay with him by night. When the man had made his journey and won his wish, he came home and, at once causing the parrot to be brought to him, questioned her concerning the conduct of his consort whilst he was in foreign parts. Quoth she, "Thy wife hath a man friend who passed every night with her during thine absence." Thereupon the husband went to his wife in a violent rage and bashed her with a bashing severe enough to satisfy anybody. The woman, suspecting that one of the slave girls had been tattling to the master, called them together and questioned them upon their oaths, when all swore that they had kept the secret, but that the parrot had not, adding, "And we heard her with our own ears." Upon this the woman bade one of the girls to set a hand mill under the cage and grind therewith, and a second to sprinkle water through the cage roof, and a third to run about right and left, dashing a mirror of bright steel through the livelong night. Next morning, when the husband returned home after being entertained by one of his friends, he bade bring the parrot before him and asked what had taken place whilst he was away. "Pardon me, O my master," quoth the bird, "I could neither hear nor see aught by reason of the exceeding murk and the thunder and lightning which lasted throughout the night. As it happened to be the summer tide, the master was astounded and cried, 'But we are now in mid Tammuz, and this is not the time for rains and storms.' "Ay, by Allah," rejoined the bird, "I saw with these eyes what my tongue hath told thee." Upon this the man, not knowing the case nor smoking the plot, waxed exceeding wroth and, holding that his wife had been wrongously accused, put forth his hand and, pulling the parrot from her cage, dashed her upon the ground with such force that he killed her on the spot. Some days afterwards one of his slave girls confessed to him the whole truth, yet would he not believe it till he saw the young Turk, his wife's lover, coming out of her chamber, when he bared his blade and slew him by a blow on the back of the neck; and he did the same by the adulteress, and thus the twain, laden with mortal sin, went straightways to eternal fire. Then the merchant knew that the parrot had told him the truth anent all she had seen, and he mourned grievously for her loss, when mourning availed him not. The Minister, hearing the words of King Yunan, rejoiced, "O monarch high in dignity, and what harm have I done him, or what evil have I seen from him that I should compass his death? I would not do this thing save to serve thee, and soon shalt thou sight that it is right, and if thou accept my advice thou shalt be saved; otherwise thou shalt be destroyed even as a certain Wazir who acted treacherously by the young Prince." Asked the King, "How was that?" And the Minister thus began: The Tale of the Prince and the Ogress. A certain King, who had a son overmuch given to hunting and coursing, ordered one of his Wazirs to be in attendance upon him whithersoever he might wend. One day the youth set out for the chase accompanied by his father's Minister, and as they jogged on together a big wild beast came in sight. Cried the Wazir to the King's son, "Up and at yon noble quarry!" So the Prince followed it until he was lost to every eye and the chase got away from him in the waste; whereby he was confused and knew not which way to turn when lo! a damsel appeared ahead and she was in tears. The King's son asked, "Who art thou?" and she answered, "I am daughter to a King among the Kings of Hind, and I was travelling with a caravan in the desert when drowsiness overcame me and I fell from my beast unwittingly, whereby I am cut off from my people and sore bewildered." The Prince, hearing these words, pitied her case and mounting her on his horse's crupper travelled until he passed by an old ruin, when the damsel said to him, "O my master, I wish to obey a call of nature." He therefore set her down at the ruin, where she delayed so long that the King's son thought that she was only wasting time. So he followed her without her knowledge and behold, she was a Ghullah, a wicked ogress, who was saying to her brood, "O my children, this day I bring you a fine fat youth for dinner." Whereto they answered, "Bring him quick to us, O our mother, that we may browse upon him, our bellies full." The Prince, hearing their talk, made sure of death and his side muscles quivered in fear for his life; so he turned away and was about to fly. The Ghullah came out and seeing him in sore affright, for he was trembling in every limb, cried, "Wherefore art thou afraid?" And he replied, "I have hit upon an enemy whom I greatly fear." Asked the Ghullah, "Diddest thou not say, I am a King's son?" And he answered, "Even so." Then quoth she, "Why dost not give thine enemy something of money and so satisfy him?" Quoth he, "He will not be satisfied with my purse but only with my life, and I mortally fear him and am a man under oppression." She replied, "If thou be so distressed as thou deemest, ask aid against him from Allah, who will surely protect thee from his ill doing and from the evil whereof thou art afraid." Then the Prince raised his eyes heavenwards and cried, "O thou who answerest the necessitous when he calleth upon thee and dispellest his distress, O my God, grant me victory over my foe and turn him from me, for thou over all things art almighty." The Ghullah, hearing his prayer, turned away from him, and the Prince returned to his father and told him the tale of the Wazir; whereupon the King summoned the Minister to his presence and then and there slew him. Thou likewise, O King, if thou continue to trust this leach, shalt be made to die the worst of deaths. He verily thou madest much of and whom thou entreatedest as an intimate will work thy destruction. Seest thou not how he healed the disease from outside thy body by something grasped in thy hand? Be not assured that he will not destroy thee by something held in like manner." Replied King Yunan, "Thou hast spoken sooth, O Wazir. It may well be as thou hintest, O my well advising Minister; and belike this sage hath come as a spy searching to put me to death, for assuredly if he cured me by a something held in my hand, he can kill me by a something given me to smell." Then asked King Yunan, "O Minister, what must be done with him?" And the Wazir answered, "Send after him this very instant and summon him to thy presence, and when he shall come strike him across the neck, and thus shalt thou rid thyself of him and his wickedness, and deceive him ere he can deceive thee." "Thou hast again spoken sooth, O Wazir," said the King, and sent one to call the Sage, who came in joyful mood, for he knew not what had appointed for him the Compassionate, as a certain poet saith by way of illustration: "O thou who fearest Fate, confiding fair, trust all to Him who built the world and wait. What Fate saith be, perforce must be, my lord, and safe art thou from th' undecreed of Fate." As Duban the physician entered he addressed the King in these lines: "An fail I of my thanks to thee, nor thank thee day by day, for whom composed I prose and verse, for whom my say and lay. Thou lavishedst thy generous gifts ere they were craved by me; thou lavishedst thy boons unsought, sans pretext or delay. How shall I stint my praise of thee? How shall I cease to laud the grace of thee in secrecy and patentest display? Nay, I will thank thy benefits, for aye thy favours lie light on my thought and tongue, though heavy on my back they weigh." And he said further on the same theme: "Turn thee from grief nor care a jot, commit thy needs to fate and lot, enjoy the present passing well, and let the past be clean forgot. For whatso haply seemeth worse shall work thy weal as Allah wot. Allah shall do whate'er He wills, and in His will oppose Him not." And further still: "To th'all wise subtle one trust worldly things; rest thee from all whereto the worldling clings. Learn wisely well naught cometh by thy will, but e'en as willeth Allah, King of Kings." And lastly: "Gladsome and gay forget thine every grief; full often grief the wisest hearts outwore. Thought is but folly in the feeble slave; shun it and so be saved evermore." Said the King for sole return, "Knowest thou why I have summoned thee?" And the Sage replied, "Allah Most Highest alone kenneth hidden things." But the King rejoined, "I summoned thee only to take thy life and utterly to destroy thee." Duban the Wise wondered at this strange address with exceeding wonder and asked, "O King, and wherefore wouldest thou slay me, and what ill have I done thee?" And the King answered, "Men tell me thou art a spy sent hither with intent to slay me, and lo! I will kill thee ere I be killed by thee." Then he called to his Sworder and said, "Strike me off the head of this traitor and deliver us from his evil practices." Quoth the Sage, "Spare me and Allah will spare thee; slay me not or Allah shall slay thee." And he repeated to him these very words, even as I to thee, O Ifrit, and yet thou wouldst not let me go, being bent upon my death. King Yunan only rejoined, "I shall not be safe without slaying thee, for as thou healedst me by something held in hand, so am I not secure against thy killing me by something given me to smell or otherwise." Said the physician, "This then, O King, is thy requital and reward: thou returnest only evil for good." The King replied, "There is no help for it; die thou must and without delay." Now when the physician was certified that the King would slay him without waiting, he wept and regretted the good he had done to other than the good. As one hath said on this subject, "Of wit and wisdom is Maymunah bare, whose sire in wisdom all the wits outstrippeth. Man may not tread on mud or dust or clay, save by good sense, else trippeth he and slippeth." Hereupon the Sworder stepped forward and bound the Sage Duban's eyes and bared his blade, saying to the King, "By thy leave," while the physician wept and cried, "Spare me and Allah will spare thee, and slay me not or Allah shall slay thee," and began repeating, "I was kind and 'scaped not; they were cruel and escaped, and my kindness only led me to ruination hall. If I live I'll ne'er be kind; if I die then all be damned who follow me, and curses their kindliness befall." "Is this," continued Duban, "the return I meet from thee? Thou givest me, meseems, but crocodile boon." Quoth the King, "What is the tale of the crocodile?" And quoth the physician, "Impossible for me to tell it in this my state." "Allah upon thee, spare me as thou hopest Allah shall spare thee." And he wept with exceeding weeping. Then one of the King's favourites stood up and said, "O King, grant me the blood of this physician; we have never seen him sin against thee, or doing aught save healing thee from a disease which baffled every leach and man of science." Said the King, "Ye wot not the cause of my putting to death this physician, and this it is: if I spare him I doom myself to certain death, for one who healed me of such a malady by something held in my hand surely can slay me by something held to my nose, and I fear lest he kill me for a price, since haply he is some spy whose sole purpose in coming hither was to compass my destruction. So there is no help for it, die he must, and then only shall I be sure of my own life." Again cried Duban, "Spare me, and Allah shall spare thee, and slay me not, or Allah shall slay thee." But it was in vain. Now when the physician, O Ifrit, knew for certain that the King would kill him, he said, "O King, if there be no help but I must die, grant me some little delay, so that I may go down to my house and release myself from mine obligations and direct my folk and my neighbours where to bury me and distribute my books of medicine. Amongst these I have one, the rarest of rarities, which I would present to thee as an offering. Keep it as a treasure in thy treasury." "And what is in this book?" asked the King, and the Sage answered, "Things beyond compt, and the least of secrets is that if, directly after thou hast cut off my head, thou open 3 leaves and read 3 lines of the page to thy left hand, my head shall speak and answer every question thou deignest ask of it." The King wondered with exceeding wonder and, shaking with delight at the novelty, said, "O physician, dost thou really tell me that when I cut off thy head it will speak to me?" He replied, "Yes, O King." Quoth the King, "This is indeed a strange matter," and forthwith sent him closely guarded to his house, and Duban then and there settled all his obligations. Next day he went up to the King's audience hall, where Emirs and Wazirs, Chamberlains and Nabobs, Grandees and Lords of Estate were gathered together, making the presence chamber gay as a garden of flower beds. And lo! the physician came up and stood before the King, bearing a worn old volume and a little etui of metal full of powder, like that used for the eyes. Now he sat down and said, "Give me a tray." So they brought him one, and he poured the powder upon it and levelled it and lastly spake as follows, "O King, take this book but do not open it till my head falls; then set it upon this tray and bid press it down upon the powder, when forthright the blood will cease flowing. That is the time to open the book." The King thereupon took the book and made a sign to the sworder, who arose and struck off the physician's head and, placing it on the middle of the tray, pressed it down upon the powder. The blood stopped flowing and the Sage Duban unclosed his eyes and said, "Now open the book, O King." The King opened the book and found the leaves stuck together; so he put his finger to his mouth and, by moistening it, he easily turned over the first leaf, and in like way the second and the third, each leaf opening with much trouble. And when he had unstuck 6 leaves he looked over them and, finding nothing written thereon, said, "O physician, there is no writing here." Duban replied, "Turn over yet more," and he turned over 3 others in the same way. Now the book was poisoned, and before long the venom penetrated his system and he fell into strong convulsions and cried out, "The poison hath done its work!" Whereupon the Sage Duban's head began to improvise. There be rulers who have ruled with a foul tyrannic sway, but they soon became as though they had never been. Just they had won justice, they oppressed and were oppressed by Fortune, who requited them with ban and bane and teen. So they faded like the morn, and the tongue of things repeats, "Take this far that, nor vent upon Fortune's ways thy spleen." No sooner had the head ceased speaking than the King rolled over dead. Now I would have thee know, O Ifrit, that if King Yunan had spared the Sage Duban, Allah would have spared him; but he refused so to do and decreed to do him dead, wherefore Allah slew him. And thou too, O Ifrit, if thou hadst spared me, Allah would have spared thee.—And Shahrazad perceived the dawn of the day and ceased saying her permitted say. Then quoth Dunyazad, "O my sister, how pleasant is thy tale and how tasteful, how sweet and how grateful!" She replied, "And where is this compared with what I could tell thee this coming night, if I live and the King spare me?" Said the King in himself, "By Allah, I will not slay her until I hear the rest of her story, for truly it is wondrous." They rested that night in mutual embrace until dawn. Then the King went forth to his darbar. The Wazirs and troops came in and the audience hall was crowded; so the King gave orders and judged and appointed and deposed and bade and forbade, the rest of that day, when the court broke up and King Shahryar entered his palace. End of Volume 1 of the Book of A Thousand Nights and a Night.